I still remember that night in Crete as if it happened yesterday. Some memories fade with age, but others stay as sharp as the edge of a bayonet. The damp smell of jungle soil, the endless chorus of insects, and the weight of my binoculars hanging around my neck have never really left me. Back then, I served in a Vietnamese air defense unit during the Cambodian campaign. People often imagine air defense soldiers constantly firing at enemy aircraft, but most of our days were spent waiting, watching, listening, protecting everyone else. Our mission was simple on paper: keep the convoy alive. In reality, every hour demanded patience that could snap without warning. That evening, our battery had just finished moving into a concealed firing position deep inside the forests of Crete province. Thick trees formed a green roof over our heads, making it difficult to see more than small patches of sky. We camouflaged every piece of equipment with fresh branches until even I had trouble spotting our own position from 20 yards away. Our convoy was expected to pass before dawn, carrying food, ammunition, medicine, and replacement troops farther north. If hostile aircraft appeared, we were the shield standing between them and hundreds of men on the road. Our squad leader, Hung, crawled from one foxhole to another, checking every firing position without raising his voice once. "Double-check your sectors," he quietly reminded us. "The jungle hides mistakes until it's too late." Hung rarely smiled. Before joining the army, he had dreamed of becoming a mathematics teacher. Even in combat, everything about him reflected precision. Distances, firing angles, camouflage. Nothing escaped his attention. Beside me sat Loy, our radio operator. His field radio looked almost as worn out as he did. The antenna had been repaired so many times that it leaned slightly to one side. Yet somehow it continued working. Hanging inside his pack was a small harmonica wrapped in cloth. "When this war ends," he whispered while tightening a cable, "I'm going to learn every song I missed. You've been saying that for a year. And I'll keep saying it until I can actually play them." His grin lasted only a second before we both returned to scanning the darkening sky. I adjusted my binoculars and slowly swept the horizon again. Small openings between the treetops were all I had to work with. Air defense wasn't about luck. It was about seeing danger a few seconds before everyone else did. Our shelter smelled of wet earth after an afternoon rain. My dented canteen rested beside a bag of dried rice that had become almost impossible to chew without soaking it first. Mosquitoes never stopped attacking us, and fever haunted nearly every unit operating in those forests. Even when your body was exhausted, your eyes had to stay alert. Night settled over Crete with surprising speed. The jungle came alive. Frogs croaked from somewhere beyond the trees. Cicadas screamed without pause. Every snapping branch sounded like footsteps until proven otherwise. Around midnight, the radio suddenly crackled. "Possible aircraft. Northwest sector. All units to full alert." Loy immediately repeated the message while Hung raised his hand. "Combat positions." Every conversation stopped. Safety covers came off. Eyes turned upward. My heartbeat became the loudest sound inside my helmet as I searched through the binoculars. Clouds drifted across the stars. The humid air blurred distant shapes, making every shadow seem suspicious. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. 20. No one relaxed. The convoy behind us waited in complete darkness without a single engine running. Finally, another transmission broke the silence. "False alarm. Repeat. False alarm." Nobody cheered. False alarms were almost worse than real ones because they drained your nerves without firing a single shot. Hung slowly lowered his binoculars. "Stay sharp," he said calmly. "The jungle usually gives us one warning before it tests us for real." None of us argued. I took a slow drink from my battered canteen and looked back toward the endless black forest surrounding our hidden position. At that moment, none of us knew that somewhere beyond those trees, a young Khmer woman was already watching our unit. and before another day had passed, she would change the fate of every soldier in our convoy forever. By first light, the false alarm had already settled into our bones like a bad fever. No one talked much after that. Hung kept us at full readiness. Even though headquarters had cleared the sky, he had a habit of trusting silence less than noise. The convoy still had not moved. Our air defense position sat just off a narrow jungle track, hidden beneath wet branches and torn camouflage netting. I was posted beside the observation slit of a shallow bunker, binoculars in hand, scanning the pale gray sky through breaks in the canopy. Lloyd crouched near the radio, turning the dial slowly, trying to catch a stronger signal. Every few seconds, static scratched through the receiver like sand being poured over metal. Then a rifle bolt clicked somewhere behind us. I turned. 2 infantrymen were coming out of the brush with their weapons raised. Between them walked a young Khmer woman, barefoot, soaked to the waist from wet grass. She could not have been more than 20. Her black hair was cut unevenly, and her face was thin in the way people became thin after too many hungry months. What made every man tense was her clothing. She wore a faded black shirt and dark pants, the kind we had seen on pôn pốt units before. Around her shoulder hung an empty cloth bag. She carried no rifle, no grenade, not even a knife. Still, nobody lowered his weapon. One of the infantrymen said, "Found her near the east tree line. She was watching the road." Hung stood up slowly from behind the gun shield. His voice stayed calm. "Keep her away from the ammunition." The girl looked at us, then at the water canteen hanging from my belt. Her lips were cracked white. "Water," she said in broken Vietnamese. "Please." No one moved at first. In war, even pity had to pass through suspicion. I hated that part most. You could see a starving person and still wonder if she had been sent to count your guns. I uncapped my dented canteen and held it out, but Hung stopped me with one glance. "Careful." I nodded, then placed the canteen on the ground and stepped back. The girl picked it up with both hands and drank only a little, as if afraid we might punish her for taking too much. A Cambodian guide attached to the convoy was brought forward. He spoke to her in Khmer. At first, she answered in short pieces, her eyes moving from face to face. Then she began to tremble. Not loudly, not theatrically, just enough for me to notice her hands shaking around the canteen. The guide translated. "She says her name is Srey Mom. She says she was forced to cook and carry supplies for a pôn pốt group. She ran away 2 nights ago." One of the infantrymen snorted. "Or they told her to say that." Nobody argued with him. We had all learned that the jungle could wear a helpless face. Hung asked, "Why was she watching our road?" The guide spoke again. Srey Mom pointed toward the track where our convoy was supposed to pass. Her voice became sharper, urgent. The guide turned to us. "She says do not take that road." Hung narrowed his eyes. "Why?" The guide listened, then looked down at the mud. "She says there are mines. Not old ones, freshly placed. She says she saw men bury them before dawn yesterday." The air around us changed. Loy looked up from the radio. The static kept hissing behind him. The convoy commander was called over. He questioned her twice, then 3 times, changing the order of the questions. Srey Mom gave the same answers. A bend in the road, a fallen tree, a patch of red soil, a dry streambed just before the trap. Too many details to ignore. Too dangerous to believe. Hung ordered me back to the observation post. "Eyes on the sky. Whatever happens down here, we don't stop doing our job." So I lifted the binoculars again, though my attention kept falling back to the girl. She sat on the wet ground between 2 soldiers, small and silent, wearing the clothes of the enemy and the fear of someone who no longer belonged anywhere. A scout team moved ahead to check the road. We waited. The jungle became painfully quiet. Then, from somewhere beyond the trees, A single shout came back through the morning mist. They had found something. The shout from the scout team cut through the trees like a knife. For a moment, nobody moved. We had spent too many hours waiting for danger from the sky. And now the real threat was buried under the road in front of us. Hung turned to the convoy commander. Keep the vehicles where they are. No engines, no lights. His voice was low, but every man nearby heard it clearly. That was Hung's way. He never wasted words, and in a place like Crete, wasted words could lead to wasted lives. I stayed at my observation post as ordered. Binoculars pressed against my eyes. The sky above the jungle had turned the color of dull tin. Low clouds drifted slowly from the west, and the gaps between the treetops were narrow and broken. It was the worst kind of air defense position, too much cover for us. Not enough view of the sky. Still, our job did not change. Whether mines were found on the road or ghosts moved in the brush, somebody had to keep watching above. Behind me, Loy kept fighting with the radio. Come on, he muttered, turning the knob with careful fingers. Don't die on me now. Only static answered him. He slapped the side of the set once, then caught himself and looked toward Hung. Embarrassed, Hung did not scold him. He just said, gently, that radio is older than all of us. Even under that pressure, Loy almost smiled. The scout team returned 20 minutes later. One man carried a small marker stick. Another had mud on both knees. Their faces told us enough before they spoke. They had found a mine exactly where Stray Mom had said it would be, near the bend. Beside a fallen tree, under a patch of red soil. Then they found another one 3 steps away. The convoy commander looked at the young woman for a long moment. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, eyes lowered, as if she expected no thanks. The black clothes she wore made some of the men stare at her with hard faces. But I noticed something else. She was shaking from exhaustion. Not fear alone. Hunger, rain, running, and war had hollowed her out. The commander asked through the guide, "How many?" Stray Mom swallowed. She spoke softly. The guide translated, "She does not know. Maybe many. She says the men were in a hurry. But they covered the whole bend. That meant the road was closed to us. Not officially, not with maps or reports. But any soldier who had walked enough jungle roads knew when the land itself said no. The hard part was deciding what to do next. If we stayed put, the convoy would be exposed. If we reversed, we might lose half a day and run into another danger. If we trusted Stray Mom, a girl wearing pôn pốt clothing, she would have to guide soldiers who had every reason not to believe her. The commander stepped aside with Hung and 2 infantry officers. Their discussion was quiet, but I could see the weight of it on their faces. A convoy was not just trucks and crates. It was rice for hungry units, medicine for fever cases, ammunition for men already low, letters from home tucked inside bags, and sometimes wounded soldiers needing a way back. Loy finally caught a broken signal. "Headquarters is weak," he said. "I can hear them, but they can't hear us clearly." Hung crouched beside him. "Send this." Road mined. Convoy halted, seeking alternate route. Loy nodded and leaned into the handset. His voice became steady, almost older than he was. He repeated the message again and again, while static swallowed pieces of every sentence. I kept watching the sky. My neck ached. Sweat ran down my back despite the morning chill. Mosquitoes gathered around my ears. I wanted to turn around and see what was happening. But discipline held me in place. That was the strange burden of air defense. Danger could be in front of everyone else, but your eyes still belong to the sky. Then Stray Mom suddenly stood and pointed east. The infantrymen raised their rifles at once. She froze. The guide listened to her quick words, then turned to Hung. "She says there is another way. A hunter's path, narrow, but it avoids the bend." Hung looked toward the trees. Then he looked at our gun. our ammunition boxes, our tired men, and the convoy waiting in silence behind us. No one said it, but we all understood. To take that path, we would have to move the air defense position by hand through wet jungle, without proper communication, while still protecting the convoy. Hung tightened the strap of his helmet. Pack only what we need, he said. We move quietly. Then he looked at me. You keep scanning until the last truck leaves. I nodded, but my throat felt dry. Srey Mom had saved us from the road. Now we had to decide whether she could save us from the forest too. We began moving before the sun had fully cleared the treetops. There was no order shouted, no dramatic rush forward. In the jungle, survival often sounded like men breathing hard through their noses while trying not to snap a branch. We stripped the position down to what we could carry. Ammunition boxes were divided among tired shoulders. The radio went on Loy's back. The gun crew worked together, lifting, pushing, and guiding the weapon through wet ground that tried to hold our boots with every step. Srey Mom walked near the Cambodian guide, a few yards ahead of the first infantryman. No one tied her hands, but no one let her wander either. Trust did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, like daylight under thick leaves. Hung kept our air defense team close to the convoy, not at the front and not at the rear. We protect the body, he said. Let the scouts be the eyes. We remain the shield. That was how he thought. Clear, practical, never careless. The hunter's path was barely a path at all. It slipped between bamboo clusters, crossed patches of black mud, then bent around a dry streambed where the ground smelled of rot and old leaves. Every few minutes we stopped, listening. I would raise my binoculars toward whatever piece of sky I could find, then lower them and help push the gun again. Loy was sweating through his shirt. The radio straps cut deep into his shoulders. You still planning to play music after the war? I whispered. He gave me a tired look. After carrying this thing, I may only play sad songs. I almost laughed, but the sound died in my throat when I saw Srey Mom stop ahead of us. She was looking at a broken tree stump. The guide spoke to her quietly. She touched the stump, then pointed to a narrow rise beyond the streambed. Her face had changed. It was no longer only fear. There was grief there, older than her years. During a short halt, the guide came back and crouched near us. He said Srey Mom wanted us to understand why she had warned us about the mines. Hung listened without interrupting. I kept one eye on the canopy and one ear on the story. Her father, the guide told us, had once hidden 2 wounded Vietnamese soldiers in a rice shed near their village in 1979. He had given them water, boiled cassava, and a place to sleep until their unit found them. He had not done it because of politics. He had done it because they were bleeding men far from home. Months later, Pôn Pốt fighters returned to the area. Someone told them he had helped Vietnamese soldiers. They beat him in front of his family and dragged him away. Srey Mom never saw him alive again. Before they took him, he told his daughter one thing. If you ever meet those soldiers again, repay the life I could not keep. The guide's voice became quiet at the end. None of us spoke. War had a cruel way of making debts out of blood. A bowl of cassava, a hidden corner of a shed, a little water for a wounded stranger, small acts in normal life. But in war, those small acts could cost a man everything. I looked at Srey Mom then. She was still wearing the black clothes that made us fear her. But I no longer saw only those clothes. I saw a daughter carrying her father's last words through years of hunger, suspicion, and terror. Hung finally said, "Tell her we heard." The guide translated. Srey Mom did not smile. She only nodded once, then turned back toward the trail. We moved again. The convoy followed her deeper into the forest. Trucks crawling in low gear. Men walking beside them to keep wheels from sinking. Our air defense gun bumped over roots and stones. And every time it nearly tipped, 3 or 4 of us threw our bodies against it. Around midday, the radio cracked with a faint voice, then vanished. Loy froze. I had them for a second. Hung raised his hand. The whole column halted. The jungle around us was too still. Then Shrey Mom pointed ahead again, not to the path this time, but to the trees on our left. The guide turned pale. She says men passed there recently. Hung lowered his voice. Positions. Quietly. I slid into the mud beside the gun. Binoculars lifted. Heart steady but heavy. Shrey Mom had led us away from the mines. Now her father's blood debt was leading us toward something else. Hung's order went down the column without a shout. Hold positions. Stay low. The convoy seemed to sink into the jungle. Drivers cut what little sound remained. Infantrymen slipped behind tree trunks. Our air defense crew dragged the gun off the narrow path and angled it toward a small opening above the canopy. It was not a perfect firing lane, but perfection was a luxury we did not have in Crete. I dropped to one knee beside the gun. Binoculars lifted. My hands were slick with mud. Above us, only torn pieces of sky showed through the branches. I searched each gap slowly. Left to right, then back again. Even with danger on the ground, our duty remained the same. If something came from above while the convoy was trapped and silent, we had to be ready. Lloyd crouched near the radio, his face tight with frustration. The set had gone almost completely dead after that last broken signal. Rainwater must have worked its way into the casing during the move. He opened the side panel with careful fingers, using a scrap of dry cloth from his pocket to wipe the contacts. "Talk to me," he whispered to the machine. Just one clear sentence. Static answered him, thin and useless. Hung crawled over and looked at the radio. Then at Loy. "Can you fix it?" "I can try." "That's not what I asked." Loy swallowed. "Maybe, if the battery isn't gone." Hung nodded once. "Then maybe is enough. Keep working." That was all the comfort we got. Shrey Mom knelt beside the Cambodian guide, pointing toward the left side of the trail. He listened, then crawled back to the officers. The men she had noticed were not close, but they had passed recently. Broken grass, fresh mud on leaves, a cigarette end near a root. Small things, but in the jungle, small things could speak louder than gunfire. We could not move fast now. The path was too narrow for trucks, so loads had to be shifted by hand. Boxes of dried rice, medical bags, ammunition crates, and radio batteries were passed from one soldier to another. Men who had already walked all night bent their backs again without complaint. I saw one infantryman shaking from fever as he carried a crate. His lips were gray. Another soldier took it from him without a word. War was full of those quiet exchanges. No speech, no hero pose, just one tired man taking a little weight from another. By late afternoon, clouds gathered thick above us. The air felt heavy, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Mosquitoes rose from the wet ground in clouds. My uniform stuck to my skin. My canteen was nearly empty, and the dried rice in my pouch had turned soft from dampness. But I chewed it anyway because hunger did not wait for clean conditions. Then the radio crackled. Loy froze. A voice came through for half a second, then vanished under static. He adjusted the dial and tried again. "This is Convoy Escort. Road mind, moving alternate route. Request confirmation." Nothing. He repeated the message 3 times. On the 4th try, the radio gave a sharp pop and went silent. Loy stared at it. I knew that look. It was the look of a man who had done everything right and still watched the war take away his last tool. Hung did not blame him. He simply said, "We continue without contact." No one liked those words. Without communication, we did not know where our nearby units were. We did not know if headquarters had received our warning. We did not know whether the noises ahead belonged to friendly scouts. Pon Pot fighters. or frightened villagers hiding from both sides. As evening came down, the forest changed again. Day insects faded, night sounds rose. Somewhere far away, a bird cried out once and stopped. We halted near a dry creek bed, and I helped dig a shallow air defense position with my entrenching tool. The soil was wet and smelled of roots. Stray Mom sat nearby, arms wrapped around her knees. She looked smaller in the dark. Hung gave her a strip of dried rice. She accepted it with both hands, then broke it in half and gave part to the guide. I watched that and felt something loosen in my chest. Then, from the direction ahead of us, 3 single rifle shots cracked through the trees. Not a battle. Not yet. Just enough to tell us the forest was no longer empty. The 3 rifle shots left the forest trembling. Nobody fired back. That was Hung's first rule in uncertain country. Do not answer a question until you know who asked it. The shots were far enough to be unclear, close enough to make every finger tighten near a trigger. I lay beside the gun with my cheek against damp soil. Binoculars pointed toward a ragged patch of sky. My job felt almost foolish in that moment. The danger seemed to be crawling through the trees, not flying above them, but an air defense soldier did not choose his duty by fear. If the convoy was caught on that narrow path and something appeared overhead, even for a few seconds, we had to be ready. Hung crawled along the line, his face streaked with mud. No panic, no movement unless ordered. His calmness steadied us more than any speech could have. The infantry scouts returned one at a time, bending low through the brush. The last man brought news in a whisper. A small pôn pốt group had crossed ahead of us, maybe 5 or 6 men. They were not attacking yet. They seemed to be searching, perhaps trying to find the convoy that should have been destroyed on the mined road. That thought chilled me. If Stray Mom had not warned us, those men might already be waiting beside burning trucks and broken bodies. The convoy commander decided we could not push straight ahead. The trail was too exposed, and our vehicles would make too much noise. We needed a way around. But the jungle on both sides looked impossible for men, let alone a gun crew and supply trucks. Then Stray Mom touched the guide's sleeve and spoke quickly. The guide listened, looked doubtful, and asked her something twice. She answered with a sharp nod. He turned to Hung. She says there is a dry creek line below the ridge. Narrow, but it curves around their position. Trucks cannot pass easily, but men can guide them one at a time. Hung looked toward the dark cut of trees where she pointed. How far? Maybe half an hour, maybe more. In the jungle, maybe, could mean anything. Still, we had no better choice. The hardest part was moving the air defense gun. We could not leave it, and we could not let it fall behind. 4 of us took the wheels and trail arms while others pushed ammunition boxes ahead. Roots caught the tires. Vines grabbed at our legs. The gun sank twice in soft mud, and each time we had to lift with everything left in our bodies. Loy, still carrying the dead radio, stumbled beside me. Next life, he breathed. I'm joining the kitchen unit. You'd burn the rice. At least the rice wouldn't shoot back. I wanted to laugh, but a mosquito flew into my mouth and I nearly choked instead. We moved like that for what felt like hours. Stray Mom guided from the front, stopping often to study bent grass, broken twigs, and the shape of the ground. She did not walk like a trained soldier. She walked like someone who had survived by noticing what others missed. At one point, the creek bed narrowed between 2 banks slick with clay. One truck nearly slid sideways. Men threw their shoulders against it, boots slipping, teeth clenched. Hung ordered our gun crew to halt and cover the opening above the trees. I set the sight line as best I could, though my arms shook from exhaustion. That was when one of our ammunition handlers, collapsed. He went down without a sound, as if someone had cut the strings holding him upright. At first, I thought he had been hit. Then I saw his hands trembling and his eyes rolling under half-closed lids. Fever, Loy said. Bad one. Min was 19. From Nam Dinh. He had once told me he wanted to return home and build a brick house for his mother before getting married. In the forest that evening, he looked like a boy lost in a nightmare. Hung's jaw tightened. Carry him. With what men? Someone whispered. We barely have enough for the gun. No one answered. Ahead of us, the last truck had cleared the creek bend. Behind us, the forest remained too quiet. Somewhere out there, the Pôn Pốt patrol was still looking. Hung looked at Min, then at the gun, then at the trail ahead. For the first time that day, I saw hesitation in his eyes. We could move faster and leave men to bring Min later, or we could slow the whole convoy and risk being found. The choice sat among us like another mine. Then, from the ridge behind us, a branch snapped. Not an animal. Too heavy. Too close. The snapped branch froze every man in place. I could hear Min breathing in short, broken pulls beside the trail. Fever had taken the strength from his body, but not the fear from his eyes. Loy crouched over him with one hand on his shoulder and the dead radio still strapped to his back like a useless stone. Hung raised 2 fingers, then pointed toward the ridge. 2 infantrymen moved without sound, rifles ready. The rest of us waited with our faces close to the mud. My hands were on the gun, but my eyes kept lifting to the narrow piece of sky above us. Even then, even with danger behind our backs, training held me. Watch the sky, protect the convoy, stay disciplined. Then came another sound. A low voice. Not Vietnamese. The Pôn Pốt patrol had found our trail. Hung's face changed only a little, but I knew him well enough by then. He had made his decision. The convoy moves now, he whispered. 1 truck at a time. No delay. Loy looked at Min. What about him? Hung did not answer right away. That silence hurt more than any order. We all understood the problem. If we stopped to carry Min carefully, the convoy would slow down and the patrol might close in. If we left him for a stretcher team later might never come. In war, men were often asked to choose between the mission and the person in front of them. Nobody who has never stood there should speak too easily about courage. Hung looked at me. You stay with the gun until the last vehicle clears. I'll hold here with 2 men. I nodded because that was the order. But inside me, something twisted. Min was not just an ammunition handler. He was the boy who saved dried rice crumbs in a cloth bag because he said wasting food brought bad luck. He was the one who talked about building his mother a brick house with a red roof. He had carried boxes for all of us when fever spared him and took others. Loy leaned close to me. If they rush us, we can't drag both him and the gun. I know. You hear what I said? I heard. The first truck crawled past, its tires sliding in the creek mud. Men pushed from both sides. Shoulders pressed against metal. Srey Mom stood ahead with the guide, pointing them toward firmer ground. She moved quickly, but she kept looking back toward Min. The second truck passed. Then the third. Behind us, the patrol voices grew clearer. Hung signaled for us to angle the gun across the narrow approach. It was not meant for jungle fighting, but its presence alone could make men hesitate. I checked the ammunition, wiped mud from the sight, and forced my breathing to slow. A burst of rifle fire cracked from the ridge. Leaves fell around us. Nobody screamed, but every man ducked lower. Hung returned a short, controlled burst from his rifle. Not wild firing, just enough to tell them the path was guarded. Move, he hissed. The last truck was nearly through when Min suddenly groaned. Don't leave me, he whispered. Those 3 words have followed me my whole life. I looked at Hung, he looked at the gun, then at the last truck, then at Min. In that second, the rulebook disappeared. Hung said, take him. I stared at him. He repeated, harder this time. Take him. I'll hold the gun. Loy dropped the radio from his back and slid one arm under Min's shoulders. I grabbed Min's legs. He was burning hot, soaked with sweat, and heavier than any ammunition box I had ever carried. We stumbled toward the creek bend while rifle fire snapped behind us. I wanted to look back, but I did not. If I looked back, I might stop. If I stopped, Min would stay in that mud forever. Shrey Mom ran toward us before anyone could stop her. She took my canteen and poured the last mouthful of water onto Min's lips. Then she pointed to a lower cut in the bank. This way, the guide shouted. She says this way. We followed her down into the creek bed, slipping, falling, rising again. Behind us, Hung fired once more. Then the gun fell silent. For a moment, I thought we had lost him. And in that terrible quiet, carrying Min through the mud, I understood the cruelest part of war. Sometimes protecting the unit meant leaving your own heart behind. We dragged Min through the creek bed while the forest closed behind us. The mud sucked at our boots. My arms burned from holding his legs, and Loy's face had gone pale from the weight on his shoulder. Min drifted in and out of fever, mumbling words I could not understand. Once, he called for his mother. That sound cut deeper than the rifle fire. Shrey Mom moved ahead of us like a shadow, barefoot and quick, pointing out stones under the muddy water so we would not slip. She no longer looked like a prisoner being watched. In that moment, she looked like the only person who knew how to keep us alive. Behind us, Hung fired again. One shot. Then another. Then silence. I wanted to turn back. Every part of me wanted to. Hung was my squad leader. My friend. The man who had taught me how to stay calm when the sky seemed empty but danger might still be coming. He had stayed with the gun so we could carry Min out. Loy must have felt the same thing. We can't leave him, he gasped. We're not leaving anyone, I said, though I did not know if that was true. Shrey Mom suddenly stopped and raised one hand. We froze. Above the creek bank, voices passed through the trees. Harsh, low, close. The pôn pốt patrol had moved down from the ridge faster than we expected. We were trapped below them with a fevered man between us and no working radio. Shrey Mom pointed to a narrow hole under a tangle of roots. At first, I thought it was too small. Then the guide whispered, "Old animal cut, it leads around." There was no time to argue. We pushed Min through first, careful not to hit his head against the roots. Loy went next. I followed on my stomach, rifle scraping mud, face pressed so low I could smell rotten leaves and wet clay. The space was barely wide enough for my shoulders. For a few seconds, I could not breathe. Then I came out on the other side of the bank, under a curtain of vines. Shrey Mom was already there. But when she turned, I saw blood on her sleeve. A thin line ran from her upper arm to her wrist. Maybe a splinter from a bullet. Maybe a shard of bark kicked loose by gunfire. She pressed her hand against it and shook her head before I could speak. "No, stop," she said in broken Vietnamese. We kept moving. The creek curved east, just as she had promised. After several minutes, we heard engines ahead, muffled under the trees. The convoy. Men appeared through the brush and rushed toward us. Hands took Min from our arms. Someone pulled Loy up by his pack strap. Another soldier grabbed me under the elbow before my knees gave out. Then Hung emerged from the forest behind us. He was covered in mud, carrying his rifle in one hand and Loy's abandoned radio in the other. 2 infantrymen came with him. One had a torn sleeve, but all 3 were alive. I do not remember feeling joy. Not at first. I remember only suddenly having no strength left. Hung dropped the dead radio beside Loy. "You forgot something," he said. Loy stared at him, then began to laugh and cry at the same time. We had no time for celebration. The convoy commander ordered us to keep moving until we reached firmer ground. The air defense gun was pulled through last, half dragged, half carried by men who looked as if they had aged 10 years in one day. Near dusk, we reached a small rise where the trees opened enough for us to set a temporary position. I helped aim the gun toward the western sky. My hands shook, but the motions were still there. Check the angle. Clear the sight. Watch the gaps above the canopy. Shrey Mom sat nearby while a medic wrapped her arm. She did not complain. When Hung thanked her through the guide, she looked down for a long moment. Then she reached into her cloth bag and took out an old checkered scarf. Faded and torn at one corner. "My father," she said softly. The guide translated the rest. Her father had worn it the day he hid the wounded Vietnamese soldiers. She had carried it ever since. She pressed it into my hands. I tried to give it back, but she closed my fingers around it. "Debt paid," she said. I had no answer. In war, some debts were counted in blood. Others were carried quietly through the jungle by people the world had almost forgotten. By the time night settled over Craty again, our convoy had reached a patch of higher ground where the trees thinned just enough for us to breathe. It was not a safe place. There were no safe places in that forest, but it gave us a little sky, a little distance, and enough room to rebuild our air defense position. Hung ordered the gun placed near the western edge of the rise. We dug fast, cutting into damp soil with entrenching tools and bare hands. The earth smelled of rain, roots, and old leaves. My uniform was stiff with dried mud. My arms still trembled from carrying men. But when Hung told me to take the first watch, I climbed into position without complaint. That was the work of a soldier. You could be afraid, hungry, sick, or half dead from exhaustion. The watch still had to be kept. I lifted the binoculars and searched the dark sky through a narrow opening above the trees. Low clouds moved slowly across the stars. Somewhere behind us, medics worked on men under a poncho stretched between two branches. I could hear him coughing from time to time. Each cough was painful, but it meant he was still alive. Loy sat beside the dead radio, trying one more time to bring it back. He had opened the casing again and was cleaning it with the corner of his shirt. "You think it will talk again?" I asked quietly. He did not look up. "If it has any mercy." Hung crouched nearby, checking ammunition by touch because we could not risk a lamp. His face was unreadable, but I knew he was tired. We all were. Still, his hands moved with the same careful discipline as always. Shrey Mom sat a short distance away while the medic finished wrapping her arm. She had not asked for more food, though I knew she was hungry. When someone offered her dried rice, she broke it into small pieces and ate slowly, as if every bite needed permission. No one stared at her the way they had that morning. That was something I remember clearly. War teaches suspicion quickly, but trust comes only after someone has paid for it. That day, she had paid with blood, fear, and the last memory of her father. Near midnight, Loy finally gave up on the radio. He leaned back against an ammunition box and pulled the small harmonica from his pack. For a long time, he only held it in his hand. Then he played 3 soft notes. Barely a song, more like a question. Hung looked over. I expected him to tell Loy to stop. Instead, he said nothing. So Loy played again, just a few quiet notes that floated into the dark and disappeared among the insects. It was the first gentle sound I had heard all day. I kept watching the sky. Through the binoculars, the world looked distant and cold. But without them, I could see the real things around me. Hung sitting with his rifle across his knees. Loy holding his harmonica like a promise. Men shivering under a poncho. And Shrey Mom staring into the forest as if listening for a voice that would never return. Before dawn, she came to where I sat beside the gun. She did not say much. Her Vietnamese was poor, and my Khmer was almost nothing. But she pointed to the checkered scarf she had given me, then touched her chest. I nodded. "I'll keep it," I told her. Maybe she understood. Maybe she only understood my hands closing around it. When the first pale light appeared above the trees, the convoy prepared to move again. Stray Mom stood near the trail, small and quiet in her torn black clothes. She would not continue with us. The guide said she knew another village where distant relatives might still be alive. I wanted to ask if she would be safe. But in that land, in those years, that question had no honest answer. She stepped into the trees before sunrise. No goodbye. No waving. Only the forest closing behind her. I returned to the gun and raised my binoculars once more. The sky was empty, but my heart was not. Somewhere in my pack lay her father's scarf, damp with jungle air, carrying a death that no soldier's report would ever record. Many years have passed since that night in the forests of Crete. But some things never truly ended for me. The war ended on paper. We came home. We took off our uniforms, returned to our villages, married, raised children, worked in fields, factories, offices, and repair shops. Life moved forward because life always does. But inside each of us, there were places that never returned from Cambodia. I still kept my old dented canteen for a long time. It had a deep bend on one side from the day it struck the wheel of our air defense gun while we were dragging it through the creek bed. The paint was scratched away in patches, and the cap never closed quite right again. My wife once asked why I did not throw it out. I told her, because it still holds more than water. She did not ask again. Men survived the fever. That alone felt like a small miracle. Years later, I visited him in Nam Dinh. He had built a brick house for his mother, just as he had promised. The roof was not red like he used to dream, but it was strong, and his mother sat in the doorway smiling as if the whole war had been pushed back by that one little house. Loy became a school security guard after leaving the army. At our unit reunions, he always brought the same harmonica wrapped in cloth. He never became a great musician. He played slowly, often missing notes, but every time he lifted that harmonica to his mouth, the room went quiet. We all knew he was not playing for entertainment. He was playing for the boys who never got old. Hung was not so lucky. He lived for some years after the war, but malaria and old wounds kept returning like unpaid debts. When I last saw him, he was thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were still sharp. He asked me if I still checked the sky whenever an engine passed overhead. I laughed and said, sometimes. He nodded. Good. An air defense soldier should not become careless, even in peace. That was Hung. Even dying, he sounded like a squad leader. He passed away not long after that. As for Stray Mom, I never learned what happened to her. No report carried her name. No medal was pinned to her shirt. No official record said that a young Khmer woman in torn black clothes led a Vietnamese convoy away from a mined road and helped save men who had every reason to fear her. For years, I wondered if she found her relatives. I wondered if she married, had children, grew old, or if the forest took her the way it took so many others. There are questions war leaves behind on purpose. I think, not because answers do not exist, but because the living must learn to carry silence. I still have her father's checkered scarf. It is folded inside a small wooden box beside my old unit photograph. The cloth has faded badly. One corner is torn. If you saw it in a market, you might not pay a single coin for it. But to me, it is heavier than any weapon I ever carried. When I hold it, I remember the smell of wet earth in Crete. I remember Loy's dead radio, Min's fevered whisper, Hung standing by the gun, and Stray Mom pressing the scarf into my hands, saying, debt paid. But I have never believed the debt was paid. Her father once saved 2 wounded Vietnamese soldiers. Years later, his daughter saved more of us than she ever knew. That was not a debt settled in blood. That was humanity passing from one broken hand to another in the middle of a cruel war. And whenever I hear rain tapping on leaves, I am back there again, An air defense soldier watching an empty sky. Learning that sometimes the thing that saves you does not come from above, but from a wounded heart walking out of the forest.